My name is Claude Blanc, and I am the publisher at New City Press. My guest today is Lorna Gold, who just published a new book entitled Climate Generation, Awakening to Our Children's Future. Lorna Gold works for Trocare, the Irish Catholic Development Agency. She's a specialist in international development who has worked across academic and NGO contexts for almost 2 decades. She holds a PhD in economic geography from Glasgow University and currently lectures in applied social studies in Maynooth University. She has published widely, being the editor and author of numerous books, journals, policy reports, and academic papers. She is a regular contributor to public debate on climate justice in Ireland and internationally. She is vice chair of the Global Catholic Climate Movement and a member of the Irish government's advisory group on the National Climate Dialogue. Lorna, welcome.
Thanks, Claude.
So, Lorna, why did you write this book, Climate Generation, Awakening to Our Children's Future?
I mean, I wrote many policy reports about climate change in my work in Trocare, but the real spur to write this book came about after I had my own children, because I guess having my own kids made me realise the urgency of the situation that we're facing. I've had to study the science for my work in Trocare, and coming face to face with that science and the timelines around when things are going to happen, the impacts, really, really affected me. And when I became a mum, I think what struck me on my maternity leave in particular with my second child was the information gap, the kind of sense of detachment that parents have when it comes to issues like climate change. I would be meeting parents in the school, at the school gates, and on the one hand I would be so aware that these parents care deeply about their children. We all do. We all care about what happens to our kids. They would do absolutely anything for those kids, and yet they didn't seem to see that there is a massive issue staring us right in the face now that's going to have an impact on all our children.
How will your book change that?
It tells my story. It tells one mother's story of waking up to what this climate crisis means and how it's going to impact on our children. So I wrote the book thinking of those parents that I meet every day in the schoolyard, and wrote something specifically for them and for grandparents in particular, because I meet many concerned grandparents on climate change. So my book, how does it address it? It starts by saying, we all love our kids. We all want the best for our children. But do you know what? There is an issue staring us in the face now that we need to, as parents, understand and come to terms with, and recognise that it's not easy. It's definitely not an easy issue for parents to face, as it's not an easy issue for anybody. But we can either sit back now and watch the world, the climate break down, or we can start to do things in our own lives, in our societies, to try and address that.
Yes, but most people consider the climate change issue like a macro issue that they cannot do anything about. So how can we change that awareness? How do you go about it?
I think that is the issue. And I think that sitting here, you can feel very detached from the hugeness of climate change and also the urgency. I think when people say something's urgent, the instinct is to pull the duvet over your head and to pull the blanket up and to kind of pretend it's not happening. But I think what I find, and what I talk about a lot in the book, is that we can't afford as parents to ignore this. If we start with the small things and start to look around and see what we can do, we really discover that there are many things we can do.
Like what?
Like what? We can do things on a personal level. So we can do the small things on a personal level. In my family, one of the things we've done is cut down on our meat consumption, for example, because the consumption of red meat is and dairy is one of the most polluting in terms of climate change Now, I never thought we would manage to do it, but we've managed to halve our meat consumption, and we're hoping over Lent to maybe go vegetarian for a month, but to start to introduce those ideas. But then there's other big solutions which only governments can have to take the lead on. So one of the things that I've got very involved in is campaigning for climate justice, climate action, because the big things like changing our energy system to renewable energy, like putting in place public transport, better infrastructure for cyclists and for walking, these are all big things that can happen, but only if we give our governments let's say the permission to act. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I've been leading on here is really raising the awareness for that we need political change.
So what are you doing about that, and how is it working?
Well, I think one of the things I've personally been doing is following in the footsteps of a Swedish teenager called Greta Thunberg. I'm not sure whether people in the US have heard of Greta, but I think people probably will soon. Greta is a young woman, 16. She reminds me so much of myself when I was that age. And she's really, really exercised by what's happening in the world. And she basically has understood the science, and her solution is to go on strike from school every Friday. So for the past almost 7 months now, she has been on strike outside the Swedish Parliament in Stockholm. And what has happened is that people have started to notice and ask, why is this kid on strike? So in December, I decided myself that I was going to follow and do exactly what she's done, and to start a climate strike here in Ireland. So I stood outside the Irish Parliament with my little placard saying, I'm on climate strike. I'm not 16 anymore, but I'm a mum and I have 2 boys. And for me, this is as much about parents striking as it is students and children striking, because the children haven't caused climate change. It's our generation that have allowed it to get to this stage. And that little action of standing for an hour each week outside Parliament has really snowballed in Ireland until now. Yesterday, this is 14 weeks later, yesterday we had over 200 children outside Parliament.
Well, what about the worldwide impact? I mean, how do we have a global impact from this kind of local action?
So this little strike that I'm doing here is happening at present in 47 countries around the world on Fridays. Mm-hmm. So it's part of a much bigger movement called Fridays for Future. And all the little actions are adding up to an amazing map on fridaysforfuture.org that says where everybody is starting to strike all over the world. Because the beauty of doing your climate strike is you don't have to actually go anywhere. I was sick last Friday, and I didn't want to give up my climate strike. So I did my strike from my bed with my little placard, held up my placard and posted it on social media and said, hey, even if you're sick, you can still go on climate strike. And so many people retweeted and got in touch with me to say, well, we hope you're back on form soon. But meantime, we're all striking together. So this really has momentum. In some countries in Europe now, regularly they have 20,000 children on the streets striking on Fridays.
So what kind of impact does that have? I mean, how will that change policies and ways and our lifestyle?
I think the first thing it does is starts to wake people up to the fact that this is so serious, so urgent, that children are prepared to skip school, prepared to go on strike and come out and say to the adults, we need you to step up now. So the first thing is raising huge awareness, but it's more than awareness, it's building understanding of the fact that this has to suddenly rise to the top of everybody's agenda. And people say to me, well, children can't vote. How come the children are striking? They've got no vote. But I pretty much guarantee that those children have families, they have parents, they have grandparents, they have communities. And if they're prepared to take such a radical action, I'm sure that every single child is going back home and saying, do you know, what are you doing, Mum? What are you doing, Dad? How are you going to vote? How are you going to, they have their children, we know as parents, because they can also pester us. Children are huge influencers on parents' lives, probably the most impactful influencers on parents' lives and their grandparents in particular. So those children, that generation that's growing up now and out on climate strike, are going to influence their parents to vote in certain directions. They can't force their parents. But also within a couple of years, those 16-year-olds will be 18-year-olds, and they'll be voters. And they'll be looking for political parties that are going to be focused on climate solutions.
Yeah, so I read an article recently in the Harvard Business Review indicating that when people are aware that their neighbors are environmentally conscious and are doing something for the environment, it encourages them to do the same. So in the long run, how are we going to change the culture? Because it's really, isn't it a cultural issue?
One of the nicest experiences of the past few months for me with Climate Generation has been to see how my own local hometown here in Ireland, Maynooth, has really stepped out to support me and to support the whole movement around cultural change and climate change. So we have a wonderful group now called Zero Waste, which essentially was started by a group of mums with young kids who they were fed up with the marketing and the constant drive to buy new stuff, and it's particularly strong for mothers in the pressure to be the best and to have the latest thing. So they decided to come together as a small community group to say, no, we want to focus on zero waste. What does that mean? And then they started to come to join forces and now they have set up a cloth diaper library. It's called. It's a way to go back to what we used to do, which was to wash diapers and to have less waste. But they've come up with a whole series of ideas now of things we can do. That we have swap shops for our clothes so that we don't have to buy any new clothes, but we share them together in this group. We have a library of things, which is taking the idea of a library and turning into a place where you can share actual things that you need for your kids. So if you need a pram or you only need to borrow it for a year, you can have the pram for a year. If you need to borrow some other toys which your kid is only going to use for 6 months, you can do that. So it's about, as you say, changing culture and recognizing that the consumer culture that we live in is actually, quite frankly, killing us and killing our planet. And we really need to change that. And when you start to wake up to that reality, you realize that you can survive on a lot less, but you can thrive on a lot less. And having less means that you have more time also to engage with your community and to share what you have.
So are we going to save the planet?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you are optimistic for the future.
I think there's two words. There's one that's optimism and one that's hopeful. And I think I prefer to say that I am hope-filled rather than optimist, because optimism means you're side you kind of to me it speaks more about a feeling. And if I look at everything that's happening in the world, that feeling is not optimistic because there is so much really negative stuff happening. But when I start to act, and here I'll come back to Greta Thunberg, that 16-year-old, because she has a mantra which I've made my own. And that is that hope comes when we take action, and only then. And that's what my story has been through climate generation and through the work that I'm doing with the climate strikes. As soon as I start to act and to take action, big or small, I start to find hope. And that's what drives me on. So I'm full of hope, even though I'm not exactly optimistic.
So you're talking about saving the planet one small action at a time, one person at a time, basically.
One person at a time, but one person who reaches out and takes the hands of many, many other people, because the problem of climate change will only be solved by collective action. One person acting in isolation won't achieve much. If we all turned off our electricity today and hoped that would solve climate change it's not enough. What we're talking about is collective action. And it's perhaps an old-fashioned idea that is becoming fashionable again. That it's about building communities and building a shared purpose. And we have a golden opportunity today to do that on a massive scale via the use of the internet, via social media. We give out as parents very often about social media, about our phones, about the amount of time people spend online. Well, here's one place where we can really change things through a positive use of social media. Because if everybody who was on Facebook or Google decided to take climate action today, we would be far along the way to solving the issue. Great.
Lorna, thank you so much for your time. This was beautiful, and we're looking forward to hearing more from you and see what's happening in that in that strike movement all over the world. Again, Lorna, thank you so much.
Thanks, Claude.